You've been up since dark 30 and sunrise was a while ago. You've gone 200 miles already and earned a stop to stretch your legs and fuel up. Welcome to 200 Miles Before Breakfast, a podcast by, for, and about the members of the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. This is episode 51, released on the 14th of March, 2022. Our guest is Jason Oliver, member since 2021. We've got another twofer here for you with episodes 51 and 52. To soothe your soul, here in 51, we've got brewmaster Jason Oliver. And in 52, we'll get you going again with coffee entrepreneur Renee Steenvoorden. Check them both out. And if you know an MOA member with a really cool job, let us know about them by dropping us an email introduction to podcast@bmwmoa.org. And I can tell you this right now, in episode 53, we've got another MOA member with a really cool job coming up. So make sure you tune in for that. The MOA has three pretty epic events coming up in 2022, besides the national rally, that is. And they're for just about pretty much anybody who loves riding. First up is the Don't Be Yeller Roundup, and that's going to be in Yellow Pine, Idaho. This is going to be a fun MOA weekend, and it takes place August 11th through the 14th of 2022 and gives you plenty of opportunity to explore one of the featured food, fuel, and lodging stops along the Idaho Backcountry Discovery Route. You can take a tour, guided or on your own, and even visit a ghost town if you want. And for you folks that might not be super into off-road riding, don't worry. You don't need any off-road skills or an off-road bike to get to Yellow Pine. After Yellow Pine is the 9th annual Waylon Wayne weekend, and that runs from September 7th through the 11th in Nelsonville, Ohio. Waylon Wayne is a 5-day adventure motorcycle rally where you can enjoy hairpin twisties and scenic country roads, 130 miles of challenging trails through Wayne National Forest, and endless miles of country gravel roads. Whatever your style of riding, you will find it at Waylon Wayne Weekend. Wrapping up this trifecta is the Thrills in the Hills Texas Hoedown. The always well-attended Kerrville, Texas MOA Getaway is being expanded into this new event we're calling the Texas Hoedown, and it's running from September 29th through October 2nd. You can visit some of the best roads in Texas, and while you're there, get some of the best barbecue as well. We hope to see you at one of these events in 2022, and you can get more information on all of them by visiting the events calendar on the MOA website at bmwmoa.org. Joining me on this episode of 200 Miles Before Breakfast is Jason Oliver, who is the brewmaster at Devils Backbone right here in my home state of Virginia. Jason, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Wes.
Glad to hear that. And I guess the first question is on everybody's mind. How do you become a brewmaster? Because that's we're going to talk about motorcycles. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think for a lot of people, especially bikers, I feel comfortable calling many of us bikers. Beer is a favorite thing, and we all at one point or another sit around and go, man, it would be cool to run a brewery. But we don't do it, of course, because we're, teachers or lawyers or, construction workers or, whatever. None of us go and actually become a brewmaster. So how do you even train to become a brewmaster?
So I preface that with I'm a brewer because I studied liberal arts. If I studied something that's actually useful for brewing, I probably wouldn't be doing brewing. If I was a chemist or a microbiologist, I probably wouldn't be a brewer. But I studied history and philosophy, so thus I am a brewer. So I think I'm the only brewer I know that found out about brewing in a career book, and it was called Unique Careers. And so the backstory is, I studied history and philosophy. I love liberal arts. I love those subjects. After college, I spent a summer up in Kenai, Alaska, working at a salmon cannery. And on the way out, I don't know, I just made this point. It's like, I want to try as many beers as I could as I drove across the country with my buddy. And, you know, and I guess this is back in 1995. So it was called microbrewing back then. I went to school at a small liberal arts school called Davis and Elkins College in Elkins, West Virginia. And there wasn't a lot of craft beer. And I didn't even really know what craft beer was. On sort of school breaks, I'd visit some friends. And I sort of got turned on to my first craft brewer is probably Legend, when they newly opened in 1994 in Richmond. And they just had this little cubby hole downstairs. Now they have a much bigger space upstairs. But
yeah,
I remember
I've been there.
He took me there. I was like, oh, this is really cool. You can actually go to a brewery that makes their own beer. This is neat. But I knew nothing about beer. I just thought it was kind of neat. And then I visited another buddy during school break my senior year in Baltimore and took me to Sisson's, which was a brew pub, I think Baltimore's first brew pub. And once again, I thought it was just really cool. So, you know, that was sort of in the background. And then when I was driving across country, I was, you know, got to the Midwest and I was drinking like the old regional brands like Lion and Kugels and Point and Grain Belt and these old, but also like, you know, if we stumbled across something just new, I'd try it. When I got to the West Coast, Bellingham, Washington, I remember me and my buddy Joel, we went into this supermarket and they had a whole aisle of beer, which back on the East Coast, we didn't really have that back then in 1995. Like, but this was a whole row, like, you know, kind of modern day times, really. What is now out here, but back then, you know, the West Coast is so much more ahead of the East Coast in regards to kind of small breweries. And I just remember just trying different things. And I don't know, once again, just sort of enjoying it, not really thinking too much about it. On the ferry that took us from Bellingham, Washington up to Hayes, Alaska, had a little pub on it. And pictures of Alaskan Amber Ale were the same pictures of like domestic beer. So, you know, me and my friend and our new friends on the ferry were just buying pictures of Alaskan Amber. And once again, just tucking it away. But at the end of the summer, I had to come back and had to figure out what I want to do with my life. And so I got back east and I was in the University of Maryland bookstore just looking at career books, and Unique Careers came up, and, you know, it's all alphabetized. And so I got to the end of the B's and it was brewmaster. I'm just like, yes, that's it. You know, it's like, it was a epiphany because, you know, it's all those dots aligned. Like, it's like, oh yeah, there's all these small new breweries popping up and I like beer and why not? Yeah. And so then I just put all my effort into like kind of getting my foot in the door. And I don't want to bore anyone, but like I can go on and on about this. But yeah, essentially make a long story short, and it is kind of a long story. I found out about various brewing programs in the country. I just started visiting the local breweries around me. I grew up right in between Baltimore and DC. And so kind of growing up almost equidistant from both kind of metropolitan areas, there was a fair density for at least 1995 days back then where I could, you know, very quickly drive to Baltimore, very quickly drive to the DC area. And so I'll just visit breweries and talk to their brewers and pick their brains and, you know, how did you get started and do you need any help and this and that. And I found out a couple schools and I started researching them. And I actually had a tour, a really great tour with, back then it was called Clipper City. It's now Heavy Seas. I mean, same business. They just sort of changed names pretty early on. In fact, the owner of that was the one, Hugh Sisson, who opened up Maryland's first brew pub, Sisson's, which was my second brewery I've ever visited. But anyway, I had a great tour from their brewmaster when they first opened up Clipper City, and he was just very well spoken. And he went to UC Davis in California for this 6-month master brewers program. And he just sort of sold me on that. And then after doing some research, it was like one of the probably the most in-depth at that time in the country. So I figured out, okay, that's where I want to go. But luckily, I also got some great advice from my father. It was like, you know, it's like, why don't you get a job at a brewery first? And so
see if you even like the way it smells.
Yeah. And quite honestly, that was also the advice from that book, Unique Careers, which started all this, which I never bought. I just
just thumbed through it until something jumped out at you.
I just like, hey, I saw that like 1.5 page blurb on Brewmaster. That's all I needed. And anyway, so yeah, so I figured out, well, in the meantime, I figured I wanted to go to Davis. I went to college, a community college at night school to get some chemistry and microbiology, which I was very sorely lacking, being more of a humanities guy. But then at the same time, I was working kind of part-time at UPS and just started hounding brewers. And my resume came across this one in Baltimore called the Wharf Rat. The brewery was called Oliver's Brewing Company, which shares my last name, my surname Oliver, no relation. But I swear I sent the letter out, and a day later I got a phone call. I didn't even know the mail worked that quick. And I was happened to be going to see an Orioles game with my father, and it's right across from Camden Yards. And I went in there, met the brewers, met the owners, and the next day I had my first brewing job, and that was great.
Awesome.
And, yeah, that's how I got my foot in the door. And then I went out to UC Davis after a year and a half being assistant brewer, being like, essentially trained to brew their way. I went out to Brewing School, got some theoretical knowledge, then came back east and been doing it ever since.
So when you went to the program at you said UC Davis, right?
Yeah.
So that's University of California, Davis, California. Gotcha. Did you have to like learn a bunch of chemistry and stuff like that? Because I know there's got to be some chemistry involved. You don't just throw some plants and water into a vat and boil it and it turns into delicious beer.
I tried that once in college, and I had no idea. I'd mix flour and water together, and it was terrible. So yeah, but yeah, and you didn't need a degree to get into this program, but you needed a certain amount of college level science, and that's why I went to night school and took some microbiology and
gotcha.
I could fulfill the prerequisites. But what's cool about brewing is that it is very multi-disciplined, where there's chemistry and microbiology and biochemistry, there's physics, there's engineering. What we do as brewers is really take natural raw ingredients, and manipulate them into an end result. And we manipulate them using, natural reactions. And those reactions are either biochemical reactions or chemical reactions or physical reactions or microbiological reactions. And so, we're just sort of helping we're just steering nature. And it's a great process, and beer is a very natural thing, but how people have figured out over the millennia is absolutely fascinating. And whether you're making beer at home or at a small brewery or at a large brewery, it is pretty much the same process. There are a lot of nuances, and the more control you have, the better. But we are I like to say we're wranglers of natural reactions. We just try to steer them this way and that.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's take a break from the beer talk and talk about motorcycles, because I'm always interested. I didn't in all of that. You drove to across country, and you didn't take a motorcycle. There must have been a reason for that. Were you not into motorcycles yet when you were at college age?
I was, but I wasn't, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I was clueless, and I would say, in some ways I still am clueless, and that's a great thing about brewing or motorcycles. There's always so much more to learn. And so you're constantly learning. And that's why I love my career. But then also I love motorcycles, because you're constantly learning more about mechanically, you're learning more about safety, you're learning more about techniques. And so, yeah, back then I loved two-wheeled motorized vehicles ever since I was probably before I was 12. But when I was 12, I got my first mini bike, and it had little Sears 3.5 horsepower, I think Briggs and Stratton. The back brake was a metal plate that you kicked and it hit the back tire.
Oh,
and so pull start.
That sounds safe.
Oh, no suspension whatsoever, pretty much. But anyway, I love riding that thing. And then when I was 14, I got a little Honda XL 75, and then I got just a free moped, and I just messed around on. Then I had a XR80, which I got from my XL75 was kind of dying. I took some parts off that and made this broken XR80 go. And so I always loved, like, just dirt bikes and tooling around. Yeah. And then I had also another moped in that time. I always had like a couple little just small displacement bikes kicking around when I was in high school, I guess, in middle school and high school. When I went to college, I kind of took one of these mopeds at college, but got thrashed pretty quickly. But yeah, and then I bought a motorcycle in college, but then I never really got it legalized, and that's a whole nother story. But anyway, I traded a guitar for it, and it's like I brought it back from college. I don't know, like it was underrealized. I didn't realize really like motorcycle until really I came down to help open up Devils Backbone.
Right.
Before Devils Backbone, I was living in DC, and I was.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, actually, I didn't mind DC too much. I mean, I didn't have a car for a couple of years, which was great. I just kind of tooled around. I had a little Kimco People scooter. I call it People because it sounds fancier.
Right.
But that thing was a little two-stroke, deregulated, like souped up thing. That thing would like burn any car off of a stoplight.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I mean, I used to zip around that town. Plateless, whatever. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and living in DC living in the city is not so bad. It's I lived inside the Beltway in Virginia for a really long time, and eventually, yeah, exactly. Eventually, had to get out. I just couldn't stand it anymore. But living outside the city, close in, is a lot different than living in the city.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed my time downtown, but but when I moved down to help open Devils Backbone in 2008, which is just southwest of Charlottesville, Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Blue Ridge Parkway is like right up the hill from us. It's a beautiful area. I bought my first, well, it's not my first, but I guess I registered my first.
Your first legal motorcycle.
Yeah, which was a DRZ 400, Suzuki DRZ 400 dual sport.
Oh yeah.
Actually, at the time, I also bought a little vintage Honda CL 200 Scrambler, and I had a XR 500 from the same year that I had my XL 75 when I was a kid, and so I had these little bikes, but only one actually became legal, and that was the DRZ, and I rode that just all around, exploring the park roads, the gravel roads, and it was a lot of fun. But I kept it out back of the brewery, and because the brewery is located in, just like I said, near the parkway, it backs up in the mountains. It's just a beautiful area. So even like sometimes I lived at Wintergreen, I lived in the county, I lived in Charlottesville, but the bike always stayed at the brewery because the brewery is where the best riding was. And so that thing kept out back of the brewery until I sort of bought a house down in Nelson County. And but things didn't really come to a head until about 2016. So not too long ago, it's when I first bought my first twin. And that just sort of like was a game changer. I don't know, like it was just, I fell in love with twin cylinder motorcycles. I mean, it's just night and day. It was just, once again, it was epiphany. Like the career book was epiphany that I wanted to become a brewer. And when I rode my first twin, I was like, what was I missing all of my life,
Well, you were busy with other stuff like pushing a bike up a hill. So what drew you to BMWs?
So, everything is sort of an evolution, but when I was living in DC, I was dating a woman. She worked at the Smithsonian, and she turned me on, like, this is probably back circa 2005 or 6, to Long Way Around. And she had no interest in motorcycles whatsoever, but she really liked that series, as she really liked she explained that this is like a buddy movie or a buddy series. And
it really is.
Yeah. And she really liked just the interplay between Ewan and Charlie. And so she rewatched it with me, and I just loved the concept. I love to travel. And, I would say that's one dot along the road that got me to my current BMW bike. And then, of course, when Long Way Down came out, I watched that. I still haven't watched the most recent one in South America. But
they're on Harleys, right?
I know, right? It doesn't really count anymore, right?
It's cool that they're doing it on electric bikes, but it's not the same as when they were riding GSs all over the world.
But yeah, so that was like a first thing, and then then I have this dream, like so many people do, of just like kind of just tooling around for a while, and I had a contract, and so about circa 2016, Devils Backbone got purchased by Anheuser-Busch. So the world's largest brewing company purchased our craft brewery in Virginia.
Yeah.
And so I had a contract to stay on. And by the way, though, it was really the best thing that could have happened to our company. It was great. I know a lot of people kind of like look at things as a very conspiratorial way, like, they're going to buy you, they're going to shut you down, you're going to cheapen your stuff. But, that's just, it's pretty much, I kind of want to cuss now, but I promise I wouldn't. So it's kind of BS.
I think we all knew where you were going with that.
But yeah. So anyway, so my thing was, after 5 years was up, I wanted to buy a GS and travel around the country and travel around the world. And, actually that 5 years has come and gone this past year. So I'm on for another 3 years. And, but what happened was I was going to buy a GS in 2021 or so, 2021, 2022. But how you peruse the listings and you peruse Cycle Trader and Rumble On and all those things. And so I saw this listing this is in 2019. I saw a listing for a 2016 GS that had about 260 miles on it. And it was like almost a third off or a quarter to third off. Like, so when am I going to get this opportunity to buy essentially a brand new bike that's cut? I mean, that was like 16 something thousand, like, but it was like probably like a 23,000. I don't know. It's just like, it was such a deal. And even though my timeline wasn't ready, I was like, oh, I got to pounce on this. And so it was sold at Frontline in Salem. And I just went down there and I bought it.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad I liked the bike, and I've put some serious miles on it. And, it's, I bought my kind of pretty much my dream bike, and I just bought it a few years early,
Yeah.
That's great. It's fine.
Yeah. I have a 2015 GS that I got last year. I had a few more miles than that on it. Yeah, I've really been impressed. So, I actually, when I say I know what you're talking about, I actually know what you're talking about. And for folks that don't live in Virginia, Frontline is one of the 4 BMW dealerships we have in Virginia. It's out in Salem, which is real close to Roanoke. So it's on that spine down the western edge of the state where the mountains are. And actual mountains. They're not Rockies, but they're actual mountains. And it's great riding out there. Do you work on your bike yourself, or do you take it up to Anton in Charlottesville?
So I've taken it to Anton once, and it was for really something basic, with some tires. But since then, I met these great folks, this riding group down in half of them are in Nelson County, half are around Richmond, and they're all educators, and they call themselves the No Principals, because everyone in the group, pretty much, with the exception of one of the educators' wives and myself, were all principals at one time, and then they've all not principals anymore, but they're all in education still. So some went back to teaching, some went to IT, some went to run various departments and stuff. But anyway, they call themselves the No Principals, and one of them bought I guess they all pitched in and bought this tire kind of press device, like a pretty much a professional one. And so we all do our tires over there now, which is great.
Yeah. Changing tires in your driveway just sucks most of the time.
Yeah. And I mean, I love watching the videos of using your kickstand to break the bead, but I don't know on my bike if I want to do that. But
I like knowing how to do it. You know?
So pretty much it's the basics. So what I've done on it are pretty simple stuff, like change the oil, change the direct drive oil, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much, and then the tires really. And so that's all I've had it done so far. I'll take it in. So I went on a major ride last summer where I rode out to Oregon and back.
Cool.
And it just coincided before that, just lined up with some service. So I took it into Frontline just because I wanted everything kind of double checked.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do, some of the easy stuff. And I guess, your name, I told you about this, your name came up when I was riding back from that trip from Oregon. I was in Miles City, and it was just after the MOA meetup in Montana happened. And I couldn't make it to that, but there were a bunch of people, a bunch of BMW riders in the motel I was staying with, and we just like kind of hung out in the parking lot and,
yeah, we're like that, aren't we?
Out the breeze. And, I was talking about this little kind of electrical glitch I have, and your name came up. And I guess I looked at my phone tonight, and the memo is from like June 27th, and it was a Randy.
Yeah.
He's the one who gave me your name. He's like, oh, talk to Wes. He might know what's going on. So offline after the interview, we should definitely talk about that and see if we can figure out my little glitch, which, who knows, but it's still like, it's a workable workaround right now, but
yeah. And it's such a small world too. Cause Randy lives in Nebraska, and he bought my 05 GS from me. And we had met up at the rally to finalize that deal. So it's really kind of cool the way that all worked out. And I get that every now and then. I'll get an email from somebody. Hey, I was at a gas station in Nowheresville, and this BMW guy said that you might be able to help me with this problem. And I'm always freaked out by it, but I'm also always kind of honored that people think enough of me to say, hey, he might have an idea about your technical problem. So I try to, luckily, if I don't know, I have a lot of resources, and I can probably help you figure it out. So yeah, we'll take care of that offline. So what about your GS did you discover on this long trip to Oregon? What were some of the things that you discovered that you really liked about it? What were some of the things you thought that you might have to address, whether it's, ergonomics or weather protection or something like that? Because I know I rode to Montana. I rode to the rally in Montana last summer, and it's a long way, and you got a lot of time to think about a whole lot of stuff. And every little thing on your bike that you like or don't like comes to the forefront by about day 12.
And I did a little more of a shorter, intense ride where I iron butted out to Denver in 36 hours. I did that 1,500 miles in 36-hour challenge.
Yeah.
So 1,000 miles to Kansas City, and then it was about 600 miles to Denver. I did that a couple years ago, and I don't know. I've always been pretty good about putting miles on, whether it's in a car or a motorcycle. I definitely think I could benefit from maybe an aftermarket seat for sure. And I haven't done that yet. I do have one of those gel pads, and that was my first, the iron butt. I had a gel pad, and then this trip out to Oregon, I had kind of a sheepskin. Now that definitely helps, but I think a more supportive seat probably would benefit me. I have a torn windscreen, so a Pug windscreen. I don't know if it's Pug or Pug or whatever. It's a little bit taller than stock.
Yeah.
Totally broke my stock when going across this creek, and just anyway, that's another story. But and that's great for putting the miles on. Let me tell you. Bad. Have the highway little pegs, the little adventure design ones that fold out and back, and so quite honestly, I can't think of a lot of things that rub me the wrong way about that bike. That bike eats up the miles. It really does like to eat up the miles. And I love it for both, highway riding. It has cruise control. I know some people call it crash control. I love it. I mean, I love cruise control in my car. I use it even on the back roads. Like I know how fast I'm going. I can turn off anytime,
Yeah.
You're accelerating, decelerating with your finger, when you have to. I just love that feature for long drives. I really, it's funny. It's like, maybe I'm just not as tuned in as a lot of people, where I don't really mess with my suspension, although I wouldn't mind taking it to someone to really see if they can dial it into me. But I really don't have many qualms about that bike.
Nice. That's good to hear. I feel very much the same way about mine. I put an aftermarket seat on it and a larger windshield. And, that's about all the substantial ergonomic changes I made, and it's a fantastic motorcycle. I'm looking forward to riding it to Missouri and even farther. I got to go to a bunch of different things this summer, and I'm hoping to be able to string together enough stops along the way to make it worth my while to just stay out and see what some extended living off the bike is. Luckily I don't have to come back to my job. I can work from anywhere. Nice. So I'm lucky in that all of my jobs I can do pretty much from anywhere that has internet access. So as long as I can check in every day or two, I'm pretty solid. I don't have a bunch of people I don't have to manage a business or come up with a bunch of stuff.
Or stir the soup.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny how you and I connected, because I went to the Overland Expo East last October, which was in Arrington, Virginia, which is just down the road from the first or the primary. I don't know. How do you guys describe it?
Yeah. From our first location, which we called Devils Backbone Base Camp.
The
original brew pub by Wintergreen Ski Resort. And it's probably about 20 minutes from the Arrington Expo, where Expo East was.
Yeah.
And I live probably 12 minutes away from there. So super close.
Yeah. So we went by the Devil's Backbone building, twice a day the whole time we were there. And then not too long after that, I don't know if a lot of people listening know this, but I send out all the newsletters that go out to the MOA members a couple of times a month. And so one of the things that happens is, they come back to me when they bounce, and we update our records and all that kind of stuff. But every now and then when people go out of town or when they're on vacation or whatever, they set an out of office reminder on their email so that when somebody emails them, they get a message back saying, "Hey, I'm out of the office for the next week. If you have an emergency, call Pete. If it's not an emergency, I'll deal with it when I get back." And I got one of those emails from you, and it said Brewmaster. I'm like, I got to get this guy on the show.
He got my reply. I was out with COVID. It was right before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
But yeah, you sent me a message right away.
Yeah, because I actually look at those because it's a good way. Well, I'm also, one of my part-time jobs is in cybersecurity. So I'm always curious how much personal information people put in those out of office reminders or notifications. And I'm not saying I judge them by it, but I just absorb that information for giving advice to people who say, "Hey, Wes, what should I do about this, that, or the other?" So you actually did really well. You had no personal information in it other than that you were out and your work contact information, and that was it. So very good job, Jason, there. But yeah, I look at all of those because a lot of times people will put in their company, or some clue as to what they do for a living. And if it's great opportunity to find out MOA members that do really interesting things like, Brewmaster. I mean, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who invents beers. What's that process like? How do you come up with a new, do you call them flavors? Is that the right word? Or
Flavors, recipes, brands. I mean, it all depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, really just experience. It. So, I mean, I really love like kind of being like a history major first. I really love the classics. I really love
Yeah.
classic kind of European beer. I love how beer evolved over, centuries of time. And like beer has always been a large part of especially certain countries' cultures. And science goes along with it. Like the politics go along with it. Everything that goes along with life is wrapped up in beer from a historical perspective. So, and these things have evolved into the way they are from a myriad of different reasons, but they last because they taste good. And so
Yeah.
I have a saying that beer isn't broken. Like you don't always have to like mess with beer to make it better. Like now, I think the newer generation they love to add a bunch of fruit and stuff in that, and that's fun. And we certainly do that too to a certain degree. But the classics, I just love just making very classic beer. Now, once again, we do all kinds of different things.
Sure.
But my favorite is definitely more of the Germanic type of beer, and it just has great drinkability, has a great cultural tie-in, and yeah, it's the stuff that I love to do. And so I think also a lot of times people think like creativity, like to be creative, you need to constantly pushing the boundaries. Really, like the only boundary you should be pushing is to make it taste as good as you can make it, or make it turn out the way you want it to turn out. Like, or else everything is like this global arms race to ridiculousness, like just adding more and more crap. And, but so what gets some people out of bed, great, all the more power to them. But like, it's like, I think you can be equally creative and come up with just a normal drinking beer or a solid IPA or, a nice lager or whatever. That's creative too, because it's actually creation. You're trying to create something.
Yeah.
You're not trying to create necessarily. Yeah, everything is. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but but that's the thing. It's like, I think there's a couple different schools of thought, and just I love to just make classic beers. Now, inspiration comes from all over the place. I mean,
Sure.
It can come from a conversation. I've learned so much from my peers in the industry. I love to share information. I love to get information from my colleagues. From even just a conversation from like even not someone related with beer sometimes will spark something. You're like, gives me an idea, and then I go and try to work it into something. So here's a really terrible long, well, not too long of a story, but how like an idea of a beer came about, and it was a seasonal release for us. I think it was only 1 year, but it might have been 2 years. And it was called Skull Crushing Ape. And it came about. I was talking with the original general manager of our original brew pub, and we're talking about Michael Crichton's book Congo.
Okay.
And he was like, "Do you remember the Skull Crushing Apes?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." I was like, "That would be a good beer name." And then this is where I'm going to dork out on you for a sec. And I was like, "That's a great beer name. So what could a Skull Crushing Ape be?" It's like, all right, it should be strong and powerful. So fairly high octane, fairly high alcohol. And, grillers are black. So, okay, black. And, oh, yeah, gorillas and apes, they like bananas, right? And so, but if you use like Bavarian Weiss yeast, it produces banana characters naturally from fermentation.
Really?
Called esters. Yeah, and the esters called isoamyl acetate, but it's actually used in banana flavoring, but it's all produced by certain yeast strains, and certain yeast strains produce a lot more than others. And that's why it's actually a character in Bavarian Hefeweizens or Weiss beers. So we came up with a strong black Weiss beer. So if you wanted to, I'm not saying this is a thing in Germany, but if it was a thing in Germany, it would be a Schwarzweissen Doppelbock.
Okay.
So Doppelbocks are strong beers, Weiss, the wheat ale, so Schwarz Black, so Schwarzweiss and Doppelbock. But yeah, it's called Skull Crush Nape. So that's like where a conversation kind of like led, and a large dollop of beer geekness created this beer.
Well, here I got a beer question for you then, because I used to. I'm not a huge beer drinker. I like, nice and smooth. That kind of thing. I like to be able to see through the beer. On a good occasion. I like a nice Pilsner, which is fairly towards the lighter end of things.
Yellow beer is the best.
Yeah. So I noticed, I don't know, maybe it's been 5 or 6 years, 6 or 8 years, but it seems like there's a trend with IPAs that they get more and more aggressive. And I wondered if that's something you've noticed, or if it really is a trend, or if it's just me being sensitive. But it's gotten to the point where I kind of don't even buy an IPA unless I'm familiar with it already. What's your take on that?
So no, it is a thing. There is sort of a global arms race of hops. To a certain extent, there's a new trend in IPAs, and that would be the hazy IPAs. And so for the longest time, IPAs were getting more and more aggressively hopped, but that also went along with it. Hops provide bitterness to beer, but they also provide aroma and flavor.
Right.
And typically, the more hops you add, the more of all those components you're going to get. And so for a while, you're getting, IPAs are more and more intense, but also more and more bitter. The trend in the last couple of years have been to add more and more hops, but to do it different in the process. You're doing it to adding it to maturation or fermentation, not to what we call the hot side, where you're extracting more of the bitterness. And so they have a huge amount of hop character. And they can have a little burn to them, which actually is a little different from bitterness. But to make a long story short, beers are getting more and more intense. They're getting more and more fruity too. So I guess the answer is yes and no. But yeah, but there more and more hops are going into beer all the time, and more intensity of flavor is definitely increasing. I would say in recent years, the bitterness has been scaling back a little bit because people more been gravitating towards citrus notes in beer than say the bitterness. Mm-hmm. And that's overall in the beverage category too. People just love fruity more and more than anything else. I mean, you see the increase in seltzers, hard seltzers out there, and various other things. And that's because
not in my house, it's not, Jason.
Good. But people are enjoying that. And so these newer IPAs are very intense in hop character, but it's manifesting themselves in a very citrusy way or tropical way. In fact, some of the more popular hops now in the last couple of years have been very tropical oriented. Now, these are subtleties. If you drink one of these, you're not going to immediately be like, oh, this tastes like I'm drinking pineapple juice. But this is going to be like, oh, this is like an IPA and has hints of pineapple and other tropical fruits. So.
Yeah, and I've always heard that where the hops are grown has a big effect on how they flavor the beer in the beer production. So where do you guys get your hops from typically?
All over the best hop growing regions. So hops are they'll grow anywhere, but to grow them commercially, they have to be at a certain latitude.
Okay.
Or longitude, I'm sorry. And so the best growing regions in this country is Washington State, Idaho, and Oregon, probably in that order. There was a huge hop growing industry in New York back in the 19th century, but it's a little more humid out east. And so they're very susceptible to various mildews and blights. And so, but after pretty much the later part of the 19th century, most of the production was shifted to the West Coast. And California actually had a pretty good hop industry for a while too, but now it's pretty much in the northwestern corner of this country. Hops are still grown in England, Germany, Czech Republic, and a little bit spattered elsewhere too. And then the southern hemisphere, Australia and New Zealand have some of the hottest hops right now, actually, and their attributes are very fruity, potent, and tropical, and yeah, they're very sought after. South Africa actually has a small hop industry too, and I actually saw that a couple of years ago on a company trip, which was absolutely wonderful. Yeah. Definitely want to ride around Africa at some point in my life.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if, when you go various places for work, are you eyeballing motorcycle opportunities there, looking for rental companies or roads you want to follow, that kind of stuff? So what, other than South Africa, where are some other places you think you might want to try to ride someday?
Just in the short term, I love to ride around the Great Lakes. I mean, I think some people think maybe it's not so excited, but I love to just pop up, ride in, and then pop back down in like maybe Minnesota or upper Wisconsin. That's one. Like I said, I've ridden out to Denver, ridden out to Oregon. I've done, some smaller trips around. I mean, all over. I mean, I definitely want to do the Southwest and explore around there. Okay, here's one I've been wanting to do for a long time, and that's to ride up to Newfoundland. I really want to ride the Trans-Labrador Highway before it all gets paved under.
Yeah, it's supposed to be awesome.
And I really just want to ride around Newfoundland. I am intrigued by that place hugely.
Well, you have to work real hard and maybe retire a little early, and you can take all those trips. I actually remember the whole thing with Anheuser-Busch buying up a bunch of smaller breweries. At the time, I was working for a news aggregator, and I was part of my beat was the beverage industry. So for about a year and a half, maybe 20 months or so, I was pushing a lot of news about Anheuser-Busch and their activities and all the personalities and the companies involved. So it's really interesting to see all that information that's stored away in the back of my head come together, in being able to talk to you. And I know a lot of people were concerned that, Devils Backbone and a lot of the other smaller companies would lose their character and they would just kind of be, gentrified, for lack of a better term. But that didn't seem to happen. I didn't discover Devils Backbone until after that. I think I read in one of those articles, it's a Virginia-based company, and I was like, oh, well, I got to try their stuff. And I was impressed. I wasn't underwhelmed at all. I was perfectly whelmed. So I think whatever it was, it was much concern about nothing, because you guys are still doing good stuff.
So, when we opened back in 2008 as just this we initially opened as a rural brew pub, at the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains, foot of the Blue Ridge Parkway, near Wintergreen. I carried Coors Light, Bud, and Bud Light in bottles. And I remember our founder, our owner, and our general manager, asking us, why are you carrying this? It's like, well, all these are made in Virginia. Coors has a plant in Elkton. Anheuser-Busch has the oldest brewery in the state in Williamsburg. And I was like, look, there might be a group of people come in, and if there's like one or two people that's all they drink, I don't want to turn away the whole group. I want people to be happy. And we were selling maybe 10, 12, domestic beers a week, and 1,000 of our beers, it hardly cut into us.
Right.
And so when we got acquired too, it's like, so many thoughts regarding that. It's like we run our own business model. It's our own business. There's a business group that runs all the craft that are owned by AB. Okay. Each craft brewery runs its own show, and essentially AB is there for guidance, support, a lot of compliance stuff, a lot of kind of accounting. But also they're sort of like the bank, So instead of going to venture capital or a bank for for money, we have to have a business plan. We go to Anheuser-Busch and they fine tune our approach, but we run our own show. And so they incentivize all the founders to stay on. And so that's why I said, like, I had a 5-year contract initially, and I signed up for another 3 years. And like all the founders of all the breweries that AB has always bought have stayed on.
Awesome.
So it's like, once again, like, the scuttlebutt, it's easy to say, oh, they're going to shut you down. They're going to tell you what to do. You're going to cheapen your beer. And really, quite honestly, like, it's just, people just don't understand the industry. It's a complex industry, but who do you think pays, who do you think puts in research to develop new barley varieties? Who can trace their malted barley back to the farm? Who creates their actual spec? The little brewery down the road, no, they just call their supplier. But, these large breweries, whether it's Anheuser-Busch or Coors Miller or whoever, these are the ones, like, they're fine oiled machines, and they hire really good people, and it's been a great relationship.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm glad to hear that. It helps me make choices at the cooler, which is also, you see the different shops and whatnot where even that's turned into I don't know what to call it, a arms race where the different stores and chains are trying to have the biggest walk-in coolers they can find. You go in there and get lost. You find somebody frozen to death in the back corner 3 days later. But Jason, it has been fantastic talking to you, man. I appreciate you taking some time to
my pleasure.
Talk about bikes and beer, man. I think those are two of the things that we can all agree are good things to talk about on a day-to-day basis, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, bikes and beer, folks. Not the other way around.
Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're already a member of the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. Thank you for your membership and your ongoing support. If you're listening and you're not a member, I'd like to encourage you to join. Become a digital member for just $39 a year and support not only 200 Miles Before Breakfast, but our other podcasts as well, Chasing the Horizon, and the MOA's YouTube channel, which features tech and how-to videos, product unboxing, reviews, and other fun videos, including a tasty recipe or two. Membership in the MOA also gets you a ton of discounts and reduced cost access to programs like the Platinum Roadside Assistance Plan. You can find out all about the MOA by pointing your web browser to bmwmoa.org and participate with us, even if you're not a member, by finding us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for listening to 200 Miles Before Breakfast, the podcast by, for, and about the members of the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. Ride smart out there, and let's meet up for breakfast at your favorite diner real soon.